Welcome back. As a quick recap, Raon visits the Patriarch to request a suitable sword technique for his graduation exam preparation, offering his silver tablets in exchange. The Patriarch grants him the Fangs of Insanity as redemption for his silver tablets. If you're new or need a refresher, make sure to check out the previous part before diving into this chapter. Now that we're all caught up, let's get started. Raon's eyes gleamed with a mix of fascination and reverence as he thought about the sword's technique. Fangs of Insanity. Just like the name implies, it's an intuition sword's technique of the highest degree, Raon thought to himself, his mind racing with the possibilities. He envisioned the technique in action, relentlessly attacking its opponent with a frenzied intensity, poised to tear into their throat like the fangs of a savage beast. Raon's expression turned introspective, his eyes clouding over with a hint of self-awareness. He knew that mastering the Fangs of Insanity wouldn't be a matter of simply studying techniques or reading manuals. However, an intuition sword isn't learned by theory, Raon thought to himself, his mind acknowledging the harsh reality. It can only be mastered through battle experiences. He understood that the only way to truly wield the Fangs of Insanity was to immerse himself in the chaos of battle, to feel the rush of adrenaline and the weight of his opponent's attacks. It was a path that would require him to confront his own limits, to push himself to the edge of sanity and beyond. Raon's eyes gazed into the distance, his mind replaying memories of his intense training sessions. He recalled the countless hours he spent sparring against his fellow trainees. That's why I kept sparring against the trainees in order to learn the Fangs of Insanity, Raon thought to himself, his mind reliving the exhaustion and the thrill of those battles. He remembered the relentless drive that pushed him to wield the sword without rest, day after day, until the day before the graduation exam. Raon's eyes blazed with intensity as he recalled the unyielding passion that drove him to push beyond his limits. His voice was low and resolute, his words dripping with conviction. More precisely, and more fiercely, I didn't stop until I reached a higher realm. His voice took on a contemplative tone, as if he was reliving the moments that had defined his journey. By the time none of the trainees were in a condition to spar anymore, I finally got closer to understanding the meaning of the Fangs of Insanity, Raon reflected, his words dripping with a sense of hard-won insight. He paused, lost in thought, as the memories of his intense training sessions flooded back. Time had seemed to blur together, with each day blending into the next, until the night before the graduation exam. Inside Raon's room, Judiel's slender fingers moved with a gentle touch, carefully applying a soothing balm to Raon's bruises. Her eyes, filled with a mix of concern and affection, gazed up at Raon as she spoke in a soft, melodious voice. You're getting bruised a lot more nowadays, Judiel observed, her brow furrowing slightly as she worked on patching up Raon's injuries. Judiel's expression turned stern, her eyes sparkling with a hint of reprimand as she continued to tend to Raon's bruises. You've pushed yourself too hard, considering the graduation exam is tomorrow, Judiel chided, her voice laced with concern. Man will be worried if she learns about your injuries. Raon's gaze remained steady, his eyes locked onto Judiel's as he replied in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. Well, I did push myself because I've been sparring every day to learn the Fangs of Insanity, Raon explained, his words simple yet resolute, betraying the depth of his determination. Judiel's hands moved with a gentle precision, cleaning Raon's brushes with a soft bristled brush as she spoke in a teasing tone. That's why you're getting treated by me, Judiel replied, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Raon's expression remained calm, his eyes cast downward as he acknowledged Judiel's words with a quiet simplicity. That's true, Raon replied, his voice low and even, a hint of gratitude underlying his tone. Raon's eyes locked onto Judiel's, his gaze serious as he spoke in a measured tone. And Judiel, I have something to tell you before I leave. Judiel's hands paused in her task, her eyes lifting to meet Raon's. A hint of curiosity flickered across her face as she replied in a soft, formal tone. I'm listening, young master. Raon's eyes closed, his voice taking on an introspective tone as he began to speak. I was lying about feeding you the rage worm back then. Judiel's hands froze, her eyes widening in shock as she stared at Raon. Her face, normally a picture of calm composure, was now etched with surprise and a hint of confusion. She looked at Raon as if seeing him in a new light, her gaze searching for answers to the questions that were surely racing through her mind. Raon's eyes remained closed, his voice low and introspective as he continued to speak. So you knew about it already, judging from your silence. The air was heavy with unspoken words, Judiel's silence speaking volumes about her awareness of the truth. Raon's statement hung in the air, a gentle prod that invited Judiel to confirm or deny her knowledge, but she remained still, her silence a palpable force in the room. Jewel's voice was soft and measured as she broke her silence. I wasn't exactly sure. I just suspected it. Raon's eyes snapped open, his gaze locking onto Jewel's with a hint of surprise and curiosity. His voice rose slightly as he asked, "Suspected?" Jewel's eyes drifted downward, her gaze becoming introspective as she delved into the past. "Yes, I thought at first that it really was a rage worm," Jewel began to explain, her voice tinged with a hint of nostalgia. She paused, collecting her thoughts before continuing. Jewel's voice took on a vulnerable tone, her words revealing a glimpse of the fear and desperation she had felt in that moment. "I couldn't afford to think of it as a lie either," Jewel admitted, her eyes still cast downward. "I was afraid, and all I could think about was my desire to live." Her voice barely above a whisper, Jewel's words conveyed the raw emotion and primal fear that had driven her actions, and the depth of her will to survive. Jewel's voice softened, a warm smile spreading across her face as she continued to speak. "However, I gradually felt at ease with the warmth of the people in the annex building," Jewel said, her eyes lighting up with a sense of gratitude. "And the young master treated me as a human being, without asking anything in return," Jewel added, her gaze shifting to Raon, her expression filled with a deep appreciation for the kindness he had shown her. Her words spoken with a sense of awe and gratitude. "You even prepared a measure for me to avoid the Central Martial Palace's suspicion. To save me," Jewel said, her eyes locked onto Raon's, shining with a deep appreciation for the young master's thoughtfulness and protection. She gazed at Raon with a newfound understanding. "And I realized after a few other things happened afterward. That face you were making toward Lady Sylvia, and those eyes when you were warning me." Jewel's eyes narrowed slightly, her expression a mixture of curiosity and insight, as if she had finally pieced together a puzzle that had been eluding her. Jewel's voice was barely above a whisper, her words spoken with a sense of wonder and realization. "You were just trying to protect this annex building," Jewel stated, her eyes locked onto Raon's, filled with a deep understanding and appreciation for the young master's selfless actions. "That's why I started to think that you might not have used a rage worm, but I wasn't sure about it, since it was just a suspicion." Jewel's expression shifted, her eyes narrowing slightly as she asked the question that had been lingering in her mind. "Why did you tell me?" Jewel asked, her voice tinged with a hint of curiosity and a touch of vulnerability, as if she was seeking to understand the motivations behind Raon's revelation. Jewel's eyes widened in surprise, her gaze snapping back to Raon's face as she processed his words. "Because you've changed, Jewel." Raon's statement hung in the air, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made Jewel's heart skip a beat. Raon's eyes cast downward, his voice taking on a contemplative tone as he began to explain. "Just like you've been watching me, I've been watching you as well," Raon said, his words measured and deliberate. "You've been acting under a mask all along," Raon continued, his gaze still directed downward, "but your true feelings started to show up. And the day when Raon came to the annex building and acted violently, you were truly willing to throw yourself forward to protect Mom and Helen," Raon said, his tone filled with a quiet understanding. He paused, the silence between them growing thicker. Raon's eyes lifted, his gaze meeting Jewel's as he nodded slightly. "There was information about Haben Castle on my bed," Raon said, his voice low and gentle. "You made this for me, right?" He paused, his expression softening further. "Thanks to you, this proven extremely helpful." Raon's voice was filled with genuine gratitude as he spoke up, his eyes locked onto Jewel's. "Thank you, Jewel," Raon said, his words sincere and heartfelt. Jewel's eyes dropped, her face clouding over with a mix of emotions, guilt, shame, and regret. Jewel's voice cut through the silence, her words unexpected and intriguing. "I have a younger brother," Jewel said, her eyes still cast downward, her voice barely above a whisper. Jewel's voice cracked with emotion, her eyes welling up with tears as she spoke, her face etched with a deep sadness. "I don't know where he is, nor what he is doing," Jewel said, her words barely above a whisper, "because we were separated when we were sold." Her shoulders slumped, her body language conveying the weight of her sorrow, as if the pain of being torn from her brother still lingered, a fresh wound that refused to heal. Jewel's eyes glazed over, her gaze drifting into the past as she recalled the promise that had been made to her. "But because they said they'd allow me to see him one day," Jewel's voice was laced with a mix of longing and desperation, "I had to obey their orders." Her face contorted in anguish as she bowed her head, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm sorry, young master," Jewel whispered, her words barely audible through her tears, as she apologized for secrets kept and loyalty tested. Raon's voice cut through Judiel's sobs, his words firm and resolute. "I'll save him," Raon said, his eyes locked onto Judiel's, his gaze burning with determination. Judiel's tears paused, her body freezing in shock as she gazed up at Raon, her eyes wide with incredulity. She stared at him, her face wet with tears, her expression a mix of hope and disbelief, as if she dared not believe the promise he had just made. Raon's eyes narrowed, his jaw set in determination as he began to explain, his voice low and resolute. "As long as Karun is going after me, we'll have to clash eventually," Raon said, his words measured and deliberate. He paused, his gaze intensifying as he continued, "And once we settle the matter with Karun, I'll find your brother, by any means, as long as he is alive." Judiel's eyes remained fixed on Raon's, her tears slowly drying as she listened to his promise, her expression a mix of hope and gratitude. Judiel's voice was laced with curiosity, her eyes searching Raon's face for answers. "I'd like to ask a question," Judiel said, her words hesitant, as if she was unsure of how Raon would react. Raon's expression changed, his eyebrows rising in surprise as he looked at Judiel, his gaze piercing. Judiel continued, her voice steady, "Why did you tell me about the rage worm? What if I delivered the information about you to Sir Karun?" Raon's eyes narrowed, his face unreadable, as if he was weighing his response, the air thick with anticipation. Raon's voice was filled with confidence, his eyes gleaming with a hint of amusement. "I figured you wouldn't do that," Raon said, his words simple, yet assured. Judiel's laughter cut through the air, her eyes sparkling with mirth as she spoke. "Ha! What a ridiculous response." Raon's eyes locked onto hers, his voice low and even as he asked, "So, what are you going to do?" Judiel's voice was firm, her eyes shining with a newfound sense of purpose as she responded, her words laced with determination. "I will follow you, Master," Judiel said, her head bowed slightly, her gaze fixed on Raon's. Her voice took on a note of devotion, her words heartfelt, as she continued, "Please tell me anything you need." Raon stood up from his chair, his movements fluid and confident, as he spoke, his voice clear and authoritative. "All right, I'll leave the annex building to you while I'm away, Judiel," Raon said, his eyes locked onto hers, his gaze serious. Judiel immediately dropped to her knees, her head bowed in respect, as she replied, her voice firm and resolute. "Yes, please leave it to me," Judiel said, her words filled with determination, as she accepted the responsibility entrusted to her. The darkness of night gave way to the warmth of dawn, and the morning of the graduation exam finally arrived, filled with anticipation and nervous energy. In the training hall, the atmosphere was electric, the air thick with tension as students gathered, their faces set with determination, their eyes burning with a fierce competitive spirit. Limer stood tall on the high platform, surveying the sea of trainees gathered before him, his voice booming across the training hall as he began to speak. "It's time for your graduation exam," Limer declared, his words clear and authoritative, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, meeting the eyes of the eager trainees. Limer's voice echoed through the training hall, his words painting a vivid picture of the challenge ahead. "All you need to do is to survive on your own for a year and return," Limer continued, his gaze intensifying, as if daring the trainees to accept the challenge. His voice took on a note of promise, as he added, "If you overcome this trial, you should be able to rise even higher." Limer's voice rang out once more, "Then it's time for the top trainee to say something." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Raon, who stood tall, his expression calm and collected. Raon's gaze met Limer's, and for a moment, he thought to himself, "He always asks me to do something like this, even though it doesn't suit me." Raon walked calmly to the high platform, his footsteps echoing through the silent training hall. He stood tall, surveying the crowd of trainees before him, his eyes gleaming with a hint of intensity. "There's a saying that warriors who survive their first battle don't easily die," Raon began, his voice clear and strong, carrying across the hall. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, as if meeting the eyes of each trainee. "And you've already experienced your first battle, even though it was a coincidence." Trainees listened intently, their faces set with determination, as Raon's words painted a vivid picture of their shared experience. "Everyone managed to survive, and the mission was completed, in a situation that left you with no choice but to die," Raon said, his voice filled with conviction, as if the memory of their triumph still resonated deeply within him. The trainees' eyes shone with a fierce resolve, their jaws clenched in determination, as they absorbed Raon's words. Raon's gaze swept across the crowd, his eyes burning with intensity, as he continued, "That's why you aren't going to die, just like the saying. Get stronger and return, to be worthy of the 5th training ground's name." The training hall fell silent, the only sound the quiet murmur of resolve, as the trainees internalized Raon's words, their hearts filled with a newfound sense of purpose. The training hall erupted into a thunderous chant, as the trainees shouted in unison, their voices echoing off the walls. "Win and survive. Let's go," they bellowed, their fists raised high in the air, their faces set with determination and excitement. Limer's eyes crinkled at the corners as he gazed at Raon, a warm smile spreading across his face. As he looked at Raon's back, a thought flickered through his mind. "I knew from the beginning that you weren't an ordinary person." His gaze lingered on Raon, a hint of admiration and curiosity in his eyes. "But your skills weren't the only thing that were extraordinary," Limer thought to himself, his mind referencing the unique qualities that set Raon apart, qualities that went beyond mere physical prowess. Limer's thoughts continued to unfold, his eyes never leaving Raon's back, as he reflected on the young man's exceptional qualities. "A calm mind, unbefitting your age," Limer thought, impressed by Raon's uncommon composure and maturity. He paused, his gaze lingering on Raon, as he added, "A broad heart, capable of influencing the people around you. A mindset where you worked harder than anyone else, instead of being satisfied with your talent," Limer reflected, a hint of admiration in his voice. He nodded to himself, as if acknowledging the rare quality that set Raon apart from others who might have rested on their natural abilities. Limer's eyes narrowed slightly, his gaze intensifying as he recalled the details of their previous encounter. "Moreover, during the last spar against me," Limer's thoughts continued, a hint of surprise and admiration creeping into his expression. Limer's eyes widened, a look of genuine surprise and respect crossing his face. "You mastered the fangs of insanity," he stated, his voice low and impressed. Limer's face lit up with a warm smile, his eyes sparkling with delight. In surprise and joy, he thought to himself, his mind overflowing with a sense of pride and wonder. He shook his head, chuckling inwardly, as he added, "You managed to surprise me once again. I spared my time to be your opponent because you've beaten up all the other trainees," he thought, a hint of dry amusement in his voice. His eyes lingered on the injury, a mixture of surprise and annoyance flickering across his face. "And this is the result," he thought, a touch of irony creeping into his tone, "injuring the instructor instead of being grateful." Limer's eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on the injury as a hint of displeasure crossed his face. "How disrespectful," he thought, his voice low and even, but with a subtle edge of reprimand. The trainees gathered around Raon, their faces beaming with excitement and admiration. One of them, his voice filled with emotion, spoke up, "Come back alive, Raon." The others nodded in agreement, their eyes shining with a mix of concern and encouragement, as if willing Raon to return victorious and unscathed. Limer's eyes lingered on Raon, a complex mix of emotions swirling within him. He thought to himself, "Because I'll be filled with resentment if I don't get to witness the birth of the new king." A hint of determination and anticipation crept into his expression, as if he was driven by a desire to see Raon's journey unfold, to witness the emergence of a new legend. The group stood at attention, their faces set with determination and respect. Raon's voice rang out, "Salute the head instructor, everyone. Thank you for everything so far." In perfect synchrony, the group snapped into a crisp salute, their fists clenched and their eyes locked on Limer, who stood before them, a hint of a smile on his face. Limer's voice echoed through the air, his eyes gleaming with a mix of expectation and encouragement. "Yeah, I'll be waiting here," he said, his tone firm but reassuring. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the group, before adding, "So grow stronger, and return." As the group began to disperse, Ben's voice cut through the murmurs, his eyes locked intensely on Raon. "Raon Sieghart," he said, his tone firm and resolute. "I'll get stronger during this year with all my strength," Ben declared, his jaw set in determination. His gaze bored into Raon's, as if issuing a challenge, "So you should get stronger as well, so you won't disappoint me." With that, Ben turned and walked away, leaving Raon to ponder the weight of his words, the implicit promise of a rivalry that would drive them both to greater heights. Martha's voice followed Ben's departure, her eyes sparkling with a mix of determination and playfulness. "The same goes for me," she said, her tone firm but laced with a hint of warmth. "Don't die over," she warned, her expression turning serious for a moment. Martha's gaze locked onto Raon's, her voice taking on a slightly teasing tone. "I'm indebted to you. I'll find you and beat you up if you die." As Raon watched Martha and the others depart, a wry thought crossed his mind. Do they not know how to speak honestly? He wondered, a hint of amusement and curiosity flickering across his face. Just as he was lost in thought, a voice cut through the air, Raon. Raon's gaze snapped towards the sound, his eyes locking onto Runan's approaching figure. Runan approached Raon, a small, unassuming box held out in her hand. "Take this with you," Runan said, her expression serious, her eyes locked onto Raon's. Raon's eyes widened in surprise as he lifted the lid of the box, revealing the contents within. "This is beet ice cream," he exclaimed, his voice tinged with incredulity. He looked up at Runan, a hint of concern etched on his face. "Are you sure you should be giving these to me?" Runan's expression remained serene, a gentle smile playing on her lips. It's fine," she replied, her voice soft and reassuring. "I have a lot with me," she added, her eyes sparkling with amusement, as if it was no big deal to part with such a precious treat. Raon's face broke into a warm smile as he expressed his gratitude. "Thanks for the treat." Runan nodded slightly, her smile mirroring Raon's. I'm leaving now too." She turned to depart, but not before offering a parting wish. "Have a nice journey, Raon." With that, Runan walked away, leaving Raon to watch her go. As Runan disappeared from view, Raon turned around. As Raon turned, his eyes landed on Dorian, the green-haired boy sitting in fear nearby. Raon's expression turned resolute, and he spoke up. "We should get going, Dorian." "Why do I have to go to Haben Castle with him?" He trailed off, his words laced with anxiety and apprehension. As Raon walked, he reached out and grasped Dorian's bag, dragging the reluctant boy along with him. Dorian stumbled, struggling to keep up with Raon's long strides, his eyes fixed on the ground as he muttered under his breath. Raon, seemingly oblivious to Dorian's distress, spoke up in a casual tone. We have somewhere to visit beforehand." Dorian's eyes snapped up to Raon's face, a look of surprise and alarm written across his features. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice laced with trepidation. Raon's gaze met Dorian's, a hint of a smile playing on his lips as he replied, "The merchant city, Cameluna. Let's get some equipment before the fight." His voice was filled with a sense of purpose, his words implying that their visit to Cameluna was a necessary step in preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. Friends, the chapter ends here. To everyone watching, thank you for joining us on this adventure. If you're eager to find out what happens next, please do comment below, asking for more chapters. Don't forget to show your support by liking and subscribing. Until next time, stay tuned.